The countdown is a little ominous, isn't it? It doesn't, at least it doesn't hit you with the tone of like the Hunger Games where it's like, "Beep, beep," and then you like go get shot up into the chute. And then all of a sudden you're like surrounded by the people you have to now go kill or survive.
I'm just waiting for the
So
cannon to go off when when we do something wrong.
I know. But anyways, gentlemen, welcome to Watch the Tech. My name is Seth Klebe. I am your host. And today I am joined by two folks from Ming Watches, which is actually great timing. We will get into all of that. But I've got Praneeth Raj Singh, who is the CEO. And then we have Jason Che. So it's a pleasure to meet you. I'll have to get your official title because so far all I know is you're the guy that runs like the titanium mill.
Oh no, not none of that. None of that. Nothing serious like that.
Well,
and some design.
when you
Awesome.
find out what Jason's official title is, please let me know, because I'm not sure either. Just
Okay.
one small point before we jump into it. This is something that it's been a point of discussion internally as well. So the brand name is actually Ming, or Horologer Ming. I know people tend to like refer to us as Ming Watches, and part of that is of our own doing because we elected
Instagram
to
is
use
called
Ming
that.
Watches as our Instagram handle. So we have to take some accountability for it, but we've been working on doing a better job of communicating that the brand is just Ming.
First lesson for myself and the viewers today. It is just Ming or Horologer Ming. Well, super cool. I'm excited to have you guys on the show, especially because we've now been kind of planning and plotting this thing for a couple of months now. And between then and now, not only has Ming released one
2 watches.
watch, but 2 watches in such a short span of time. So we're definitely going to get into that. But first, maybe just to start off, tell me a little bit about what you each do at Ming.
Like I said, my title is CEO, which I think was Ming basically saying you go deal with all the not so fun stuff like accounting and finance and figuring out what tariffs mean for us and what exchange rates mean for somebody else and all that stuff. The brand's grown as the team's grown. I find that most of what I do is enable the team in Ming to make the watches and get the cool stuff out there. And sometimes I get to do really fun things like get on the road. And I said, I think that's how you and I met first a couple of years ago in Atlanta. That's the fun part of what I do. But 80% of my job is either Excel spreadsheets or like contracts or agreements or NDAs. Right. I'm still
just the back office.
Yeah, it's funny when so our COO Maro in Switzerland, he used to be CEO of Schwarz Etienne when he joined us. I had a check-in with him 6 months into him being officially part of the team, and I went into that call completely expecting him to be like, I don't know if you can curse on this, but like screw you guys.
Yes, you can.
Like
There's
screw
no
you guys.
rules
I'm out of here. Because for the first 6 months, he was the only guy in Switzerland. We basically repurposed his house into an office. He was like packing DHL boxes, driving down to production partners. And I thought like, for someone who'd come in from like a management role running much, much larger teams, he might find that frustrating. And then when we got on the call, the first thing he said to me was, Praneeth, I haven't slept this well in 15 years. Because he's like, all I do now is go look at, all the cool stuff we're working on. I look at the samples. I look at, production behind the scenes. And then he starts listing off all the things he no longer has to do. And in my head, I'm going, I do that. Right. So that's 80% of my job. But honestly, I'm happy to do it because I'll be honest, I realized very early on that I'm a terrible engineer and a terrible designer. I know enough to be a pain in somebody else's life, but not to actually solve that problem. So at least if I can like enable the team to make it happen.
You're playing to your strengths. And that's
exactly.
And that's all the best we can do. That's awesome. Very cool. And how about you, Jason?
Well, as Praneeth was joking just now, I didn't officially have a job title until as of about a week ago, until I bestowed myself the title of creative producer at Ming, but that sort of doesn't explain very much. But basically, I do everything from run the 3D printers that you'll see behind me, and that we can get into a bit of that, but I also run video at Ming, social media. Every now and then I will pack the occasional package. So pretty much whatever Praneeth gets me to do.
You'll also see Jason at events. We just give him a name tag that says Ming.
Yeah, usually.
No, I'm joking.
People just say,
yeah.
Or people just tell, you just tell people like, go and find the heavily tattooed one and he'll tell you about the watches, generally speaking.
There we go. I love that. Is the 3D printer like running right now? Are you printing your next Polymesh as we're talking?
There's one running. It's printing something that we're working on. The 3D printers print all sorts of stuff. We actually only prototypes the Polymesh on that, but most of the time, what it spends its time doing is printing little things that Ming needs, or Ming will design a file. He sends those over to me, and then usually the first question is, what am I looking at? And the second question is, how do I print this?
Okay. That's fantastic.
So the
Well,
way
I guess
we
actually yeah, please.
sorry, no, just jump into the 3D printers. I think Jason can speak more to this, but the 3D printers we have in Kuala Lumpur are so resin and filament based printers. So they're great for testing proof of concept at larger scale. So with the Polymesh, for instance, we prototyped it, I think, Jason, at 3:1.
We started at 5:1. I have a few examples like around here, like what these look like.
So that's you print them that big to make sure that the geometry and the idea works, and that allows us to do it quickly. I think Ming said before that at one point we'd still be going through the first print, and he'll have an idea, so, fire up the second machine and start printing that. And once we have a proof of concept, that's when we go and find a more industrial production partner, someone who can work with, like in this case, titanium or whatever it is in production. And then we'll work with them to bring that into what ends up on your wrist.
Okay. Got it. Well, this is a great time to talk about what I have on my wrist. So this is the Odyssey watch on Polymesh. I'm gonna have to take it off because I think the best way to like really see and understand Polymesh is through the movement of it, even before it's on your wrist. So first of all, thank you guys for sending this to me so I could borrow this for probably several more weeks than you wanted me to have it. So thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed your time with it.
I have certainly enjoyed my time with this watch. I mean, I'm going to bring this thing real close. I mean, the watch itself is fantastic. I actually do not own any GMTs in my collection at all.
Yet.
It is the one complication that I do ultimately aspire to have in my collection. So it was like a real treat to kind of explore. And I've been on the road, so I actually got to use the function, which was terrific. I played some tennis in this thing, so it got some great use out of it. And I will also say, which is like, this is actually very rare, my fiance, not a watch person, could give a shit. She actually gave this particular watch the compliment that she really, really liked it. She does not do that often. So hats off to Ming.
I guess the only question now is when are you getting your Odyssey? We're restocking them soon, by the way.
That is a great question. Okay, good
we'll
to know.
Do an invoice after.
Well, if I didn't just buy my sand dial Ming, that very well might be happening very soon. So TBD on that. And we will have to get to the sand in a moment too, because there's a little story behind that I should share with you guys. But the Polymesh, to me, I'm sure it has a million nicknames, but I've been calling it the Spider Silk since the moment I got it, because
that's a new one, I think.
I don't think I've heard that one before.
I've been calling it the Spider Silk. Maybe it'll catch on. Maybe it won't. Time will tell. But I mean, just like, as you guys know, like there's been a million videos online of people like doing this. It's like a fidget spinner of straps. But the comfortability and clearly the durability that you've baked into this is absolutely incredible. And I've got to say, for me personally, like I've had the privilege of wearing and owning a lot of different watches. And to date, the most comfortable strap that I own, the award actually goes to Panerai. It's a crocodile leather strap that I have, or alligator, excuse me, that I have been breaking in for like a decade. And it is just, it's butter. Like, it's absolute butter. This titanium.
It's a long wait for a strap to get comfortable.
Dedication is there.
I will say, in the defense of Panerai, it happened very quickly. So it's been that way for quite some time, I will say.
Nice.
But this feels like, how the fuck could a titanium strap like this feel like an alligator strap? I don't know, but it does. It's buttery.
Well, does it feel
to me
like a strap at all? Because I think that's the other thing, right? For us, the Polymesh is its own thing. It's not quite a strap, because even the most comfortable leather strap or even rubber strap, for instance, doesn't, like when you're fidgeting with the Polymesh just now, that that motion in multiple axes. You don't get from any of that.
Yeah, very
And
true.
we had one of the customers send us a picture where they put their Polymesh down, I think on what looked like an index card or a postcard. And you could see that from the transition between the index card and the, on the desk that was on, the Polymesh follows that contour, even though it's like a millimeter or so. So you get such fine range of adjustment that on your wrist, it really conforms to the shape and size of your wrist.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
When it does take shape on the
Yeah.
wrist, it's something different for sure. Yeah, I've been just looking at this thing. I mean, like, come on, it's awesome. So, if I'm not mistaken, for the Polymesh specifically, this is obviously the first iteration that's in my hand, but there might be some other things coming to Polymesh. Like, this isn't the
I think
only.
so. Yeah. I said this somewhere else, and I still stand by it. I think the Polymesh it's a first generation product, right? And I always think about the first iPhone that came out, right? At that time, it was revolutionary, but we look back at it now and go, what the hell was that?
It's not crude, but it's like there's
Compared to like
iteration
iPhone
to it.
5 or some
Yeah.
subsequent iPhones. So Polymesh, the one you're holding right now, is an amazing product. I think 2 to 3 years from now, we'll look back at it and go, that was nice, but we've come much, much further. One of the things where we're doing, we'll see where this leads, is we're working with other materials. I don't want to say what materials just yet because I want to
Okay.
save that. We're working on, so this Polymesh has a specific geometry, and the way Polymesh is done is geometry dependent. Ming's come up with a couple of other geometries that's what Jason is prototyping at the moment. And we're testing that. One of the things Ming is looking into is, hey, can we make a Polymesh with a 3D printed deployment buckle? That's probably like a much, much further down the road challenge because it's much harder to execute than we can currently get around to. The other big thing for me, what we've heard, and this is not a surprise, is since we've announced the Polymesh, a lot of the industry, including some of the much, much larger players, have now like focused on additive manufacturing as a whole, whether that's laser sintering or whatever sort of additive manufacturing as a manufacturing process. And I think what we'll find is as more dollars flow towards solving that, in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll see new boundaries being pushed, not just by Ming, but by the industry as a whole. And I'd like to think that we sort of lit that fuse.
That's really cool. And your Apple iPhone metaphor cuts very deep because my dad didn't let me have the first generation. Wasn't until several later. But I mean, that's actually in technology, definitely one of the ideologies is like never buy the first iteration. So it is a pleasure that I get this first iteration because it works
Well,
pretty damn well.
I'm going to have to push back. I'm going to have to push back on that. I think,
Please.
listen, I get why never buy the first iteration is perhaps practical advice.
It's probably a smart decision to make.
But if all of us think that way, we'll never get past the first iteration, right? I think you need to support new things, whether it's Polymesh or something else or a new brand. The reality is,
Totally.
We've definitely seen, not just in watches, but in any creative space or even technological space, people being like, I'll wait for this to be more ubiquitous before I get into it. Listen, I know we can't do everything we want, but there has to be a balance because if you're unwilling to support something new, creative, different, you never give it a chance to succeed. So
totally. And that's why you've got early adopters, right? People who either they want the first, they see the vision, they're going to go make that purchase.
And in watches, I'd like to think you're an early adopter. We definitely don't speak to somebody who's looking to pick your Swiss brand of choice with 100, 200, 300-year-old heritage, right? That's not our community. That's not who we speak to. I think by definition, anybody who's looking at a Ming or who's excited by a Ming, I would say fits into some definition of early adopter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, considering the first watch of Ming came out in 2017, I would agree with you. And I actually think this might be controversial to say, but I don't really give a shit about a 200, 300. We've been in production continuously for 150 years. Like that doesn't really do that much for me because I don't necessarily get to like wear all of that history. I get to take some design cues from it, and I think that's the advantage. Like, a Patek Calatrava. that I have, and I love that watch. I don't care too much about like all the models that came before or all the ones that have come after. I just care about like the one that I have that I wear that, yes, did lend things from that history, but it doesn't really do much for me. And I know people like watch collectors love to talk about that and the factoids that go along with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. But I just look at each individual watch. And yeah, it's part of a brand portfolio, but there's a lot of a brand portfolio I don't like at all. But then they have a couple of watches where I'm like, who cares about the rest of the brand? This thing that they made is what like sets my heart on fire, you know? Yeah. Which
Well,
does
I can see
bring
why you
me
think that's. Sorry, go on.
no, 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 no. Go for it.
No, I was going to say I can see why you think that's controversial, but I think that's a part of a private watch collectors chat, and somebody had shared their feedback on the Polymesh, and they said, like, hey, that's I might be in the contrary here, or like this may be controversial, but the Polymesh isn't for me. And I replied, and they said, no offense intended. I'm like, listen, no offense taken, because it's this quote I found. It's a screenshot of a Tumblr post on Instagram, which I think is the new version of the internet many of us exist in. But basically, the post was, it basically said how boring your life must be to live in a flat land of no opinions. Whereas here I am on my many pointless hills that I'm willing to die on. And I think that's, listen, none of us need mechanical watches, right? I think what makes it interesting is that we all have differing tastes. We like different things. And I think within reason and with respect, if you're able to have differing opinions, that's also what pushes us as collectors or enthusiasts to take a different look at watches. Sometimes I can go out of bounds and get like people trolling creators or even collectors, but in general, a healthy amount of it is not bad. So I can see why you think it's controversial, but I think it's actually healthy. It's the same reason why
Totally.
if someone said Polymesh isn't for me, I'm like, perfect. It's not meant to be for everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I am the last person that is afraid to tell any watch brand how I think they should design a watch exactly to my specification and desire. So who knows? Maybe that'll come out here too. So, speaking of the watches that set my heart on fire, this is the most recent watch that I have purchased. The quick story on this for both of you is I worked for a startup up until recently called Observe Inc. That startup was acquired. The announcement was in January by Snowflake, a data analytics platform. And so when I joined my startup, what I'd said to myself was, I am not getting another watch until either we go public, we get acquired, one of those two liquidity events. And I really was going to stand by that and make zero purchases until that moment happened. 10 months later was a little bit faster than what I thought, but I had a list of some watches. There was a Moser on there, there was a Ulysse Nardin on there was a Vacheron on there, a Panerai on there, and a Ming on there. And I decided I had to go find my way into a Ming Sand 37.08, and it took some work to locate this watch because there were only 500 made, and there will only be 500 made, um, and there were very few on the resale market. And then I had to go and do some like fun negotiating to get it actually into like a price that fits this universe, which I did, and I was able to get it. I will say tariffs do suck. So anything you
Agreed.
can
Tell me
do to
about it.
like get rid of those would be great.
Listen,
If we could
if
do
I could
that,
if I could get rid of the tariffs, I wouldn't be making watches.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But
Or maybe I would, but I'd take a break to like make a few billion first, and then I'd come back to making watches.
yeah,
Go sit on a beach or something.
exactly. But I've just got to say, like, y'all made one hell of a perfect watch. I love a creative dial. I know a lot of work went into designing this one as well. I'm also not a gold guy, like a gold watch case person. That's never really been me. But the way that the light hits this sand gold, it's unlike anything that I've seen on a watch. And it's so striking to me. It's time only, which is kind of my favorite way to experience a watch. And the movement is beautiful. And not only is it beautiful, but it's the first Solita move, like very dressed up Solita movement at all that I've ever had. And it keeps like impeccable accuracy. So, all in all, for the package you guys have created, thank you. Without all of this perfection in place, I wouldn't have gotten this watch. So, I'm stoked to now be a part of and an owner of a Ming watch.
Thank you for your support.
First of all, thank you. Welcome to the community and congratulations. Yeah, the sand was, well, it's been hard to believe it's been nearly 2.5 years since we launched that. But that dial
Before
is,
my
is
time.
still something special. And I think it also is an example of one of the challenges, Ming more so than the rest of us, but in general we have as a brand, is how do you make watches? You're in this position where we don't look at making watches as better or worse. I mean, we always aim for improvement, but we're never designing saying, hey, we could do better, but we're just going to release a compromised product because then we can save the upgrade for next year. Because I think that's a terrible way to design something. But you also have to design something where each subsequent idea you put out is as exciting. But then you go back to the older stuff, and that has to be like, man, that was awesome. I'm glad we did that.
Yeah.
And that
It's kind of like
bar
a
is,
rock star, probably. It's probably like a rock star revisiting like an older song in
yeah,
their catalog, and they're like,
yeah,
"Yeah, that was a banger."
yeah. But it also has to feel like there's been evolution from then, not just sort of stagnation or just sort of, you know, doing the same thing over and over again. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges any brand faces. I feel like we probably did not help ourselves by setting up the sort of release schedule that we had. You said 2 watches, in the couple of months it took us to set this up. It feels like we slowed down this year,
Yeah.
right?
Does it feel that way to you, Jason? Has it slowed
Uh,
down for you?
well, it's, I've only been into the company for like, I'm starting my 3rd year. So, it's been pretty full metal in
Yeah.
other ways.
There we go. Okay.
And this is our 9th year, right? So in some ways it feels like we've slowed down. We haven't really, and got a bigger team or support, and things are better planned. When you're doing 8 to 9 watches a year and you're trying to make each one different and innovative and put something new in there, it's a daunting challenge. But it's also impressive that every time I look at we have a little Dropbox folder. The team in KL has a whole actual physical board, but for those of us who are remote, we have a Dropbox folder with all the upcoming designs and designs in consideration. And it remains impressive how the number of files in that folder never seems to go down. It only just seems to keep going up.
And we're archiving stuff
That's
and we're
awesome.
adding stuff all the time. And it's just like, it's this thing of constant iteration and adding in designs. So,
Yeah.
and these designs need time to breathe because as we get further along, I think the gestation period is like you need these to give these designs time to age so that when you release them, they can be something that we're actually proud about as something to carry on the small but like legacy of the brand, as we've already said.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that actually like brings up a really good point and something I've been curious about with Ming. So obviously your first watch came out in 2017, and I took a chance to kind of like look through that historical catalog, and there's elements from like the beginning that I think have persisted. Talk to me a little bit about like how do you approach the design code today? Like how do you decide what persists and maybe like what should be changed or improved upon? Anything you can share there?
And I think you spent more time working with Ming in person recently. I'll let you jump in first before I add my thoughts.
That's the CEO move, by the way.
Yeah,
Just delegate down.
Also, it's his first
I love it.
podcast. I'm
yeah.
unaware that I've been doing all the talking, right?
Yeah, I think the nice part about working with Ming, I'm based in the office in KL, and so I get to work with Ming. I have the privilege of working with him nearly every day. And what you really see is the almost like logic to everything. The way that he approaches design, I used to Polymesh as an example, but when we were printing the first version, he already had different iterations coming up. But even in that, I could see the thought process as he was describing it to me of just like, it tapers in this way. You want a bit more camber in this direction. How are we going to engineer that into the design? And there's almost a very logical approach to that. And so when it comes to the design of the watches specifically, oftentimes it'll be Ming approaching design and saying, I wanted this visual effect. So what can we engineer into that? And like what materials or processes do we have access to? Praneeth can tell you a little bit about, our head of R&D is based in Europe, but he also goes to a lot of events, and the rest of the team is always keeping an eye out for just different things and different inspirations because we never want to make something too literal and really like pushing these ideas beyond like It's like, I see a nice like visual feature. How do I translate that literally? But because there's so many considerations that have to be accounted for, and you have an entire backlog that you don't want to copy yourself. And so these designs get harder in that way. But from the perspective of working with Ming, it doesn't feel that way because it's just like, it's logical and you just have to give it the time to like let the process play out.
Well, I think and adding on to that, there's other things where one of the biggest changes that's happened in the last 4 years, I'd say, after our fifth anniversary, is I've said this before, we woke up one day and we said, hey, we've gone from a passion project to a brand. Like, we've got a team, we've got people who basically, like, we're responsible for, like Ming and I were responsible for their livelihood. We've got a community of owners and supporters out there who believed in our vision and believed that, we're here for the long run, which we want to be. But when you start thinking about it that way, there's a lot more you have to consider. Because I think the first couple of years, you can just literally be like, fuck it, I want to make this, I'm going to make it. Right. And it might end up being something that only we like.
Hey, it's
But
for the early adopters, baby.
right. Yeah. But and even
Yes.
now, it has to be stuff that we like, right? That's still the final metric, is like, do we like this? But that question takes on a lot of nuance, because there are certain things I know we like where I'm like, hey, this commercially, this may look a little bit different. How can we restructure this where it doesn't, if let's say it doesn't work out, if people don't quite like it, because you have to keep experimenting and pushing, it doesn't materially affect the brand's financial performance or whatever else, to the point where then we're scrambling and trying to, like, the worst thing you can do is try and rescue a sinking ship, especially when you're making a product that nobody needs and people must want, which is basically a mechanical watch. The last thing we want to do is like launch something, find out it didn't work, and then try to like rebadge it or rehash it. Um, right. So I think that's where a lot of my input comes in from, where I'm like, Ming, that's a cool idea. Like, we were looking at a movement earlier this week that we want to use in an upcoming project. And Ming was like, hey, if we ordered, 500 of these movements, that would get the unit cost down. Could we do this? And then I had to push back and be like, Ming, on a unit basis, yes. But then I'm sitting on 500 movements. And if we find that, it's a movement we haven't really used, it's one that we can test, but we don't actually know how it's going to perform in terms of
Sure.
reliability, service, whatever else it is. If we find we have issues, we've now taken a huge financial risk. So here's what I'd rather do. I'd rather just, get 100 movements. We accept that that project just has crappy economics, that we've basically broken even and we don't make money on the first run. But if everything goes well, your challenge as a designer is to be like, hey, do we have something here where we can make more than 50 or 100 watches? Right? Because if you say, hey, you come in and you say, hey, yeah, we could potentially make, there are 3 or 4 ideas that can use this movement. So if the first one's successful, then I know I can backload whatever the business needs to make to keep itself going, and I take the risk on the front load. But that's how we can split down the middle. So that does influence the design process. But the only difference here is it's very much design first, and then I come in and be like, does this make sense? There are one of the things that Ming, every 6 months he'll come back to, and I'll go back and I'll say, we're not doing this. You're going to do this over my dead body, which very rarely I do. Is he really wants to have colorless DLC. Right? So it's DLC coating and it still looks like steel or metal. And I get where he's coming from, because generally DLC is quite hard wearing. So it's hard to scratch. And his whole thing's like, hey, if it's colorless DLC, it doesn't scratch. It's great. Like, people always don't want to get their watch dinged up. And I'm like, Ming, my background, by the way, I studied actuarial science and risk management. Risk management 101 is like adverse selection. And I'm like, I guarantee you, the minute you put a watch out and you say it's got colorless DLC, somebody will make it their personal mission in life to prove that can be scratched. And the reality is it's not scratch proof, it's scratch resistant, right? And eventually it
Subtle
will
difference.
scratch. And once it does scratch, we
Right.
cannot refinish it, right? So this is a bad idea, man. We should not be doing this, because we're going to put ourselves in a position where it costs more to make the product. We can't charge that much more to
Sure.
cover the cost. And when it does
Yeah.
get scratched and it can't be refinished 5 or 6 years
Yeah.
from now, somebody's going to be mad at us. And to some degree, understandably, because the general expectation is if it's a white metal watch, it can be refinished.
Right.
So that's a case of where I'm like, I can see where you're coming from. And when we started off, I just be like, fuck it, yeah, let's do it, because we didn't know better. And whereas now I got to come in and think about, like, what is this? How does this play out over 1,000 watches over 5 years and all of that? And that can influence the design process, but we have to be very careful to not have that stop us from taking any risks at all. And that's always, it's like any collaboration or any sort of partnership where it's like, by the time you're done having that conversation, you're actually exhausted and you go, fuck,
we're
man, I don't
doing
want
good.
to, and I've said this as well. I think the one reason Ming and I have managed to work so well together is we don't actually live in the same city. So there it is. We can have a conversation. It can get a little like intense and heated.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
at the end of that, we're like, okay, we got a couple of days to like think about it. And usually I don't push back unless I really believe in something. And to Ming's credit, at that point, he takes a couple of days to think about it. A
Yeah.
lot of times, he then has a solution that I couldn't have thought of myself. But at least he's like, okay, I see what you're saying, and like I've solved for that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, we
yeah,
like to call that healthy tension, and
yeah.
there's nothing
But
wrong with that at all.
it's a lot of work, man.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yes, I mean, I manage a team, and healthy tension comes into play every single week because as long as you're all on the same team and you are trying to drive forward the ultimate vision, the best design at the right economics, then you're where you're going to end up is going to be the right place for like, the greater good. Switching gears a little bit, I have noticed throughout the episode so far that each of you are wearing a couple of Mings yourself. So I would love to know, what do you guys have on? Jason, what's under the cuff?
I'm wearing our 2901 World Timer from a couple years ago. This is a piece that I've been sought after for a little while now, but it's just one of those pieces that I studied overseas for a long time. I was in Canada and in Vancouver for a while, so it just sort of reminds me that the world's a smaller place, and sometimes when the days get hard, the world's not actually that big. The movement's also pretty fun to look at every now and then.
Micro rotor situation. Okay, awesome. What's the strap that's on? Is that a nylon or?
This is a Jean Rousseau Alcantara, actually.
Oh, okay, very cool. I actually, so for this watch, I visited John Rousseau in New York, and I'm
Mhm.
gonna do a green alligator for this.
That's an
Yes.
interesting combo.
So they're making that for me right now. I can't remember if it was ChatGPT or Gemini, but I mocked up basically this watch with that strap. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, I need to have one of these in my life.
Underneath, should show what you got.
Yeah, what
Well,
you
I mean,
got?
it's the new Phoenix that we launched like what 5 days ago,
Monday.
6 days
Yeah.
ago, Monday.
Yes.
The 5704 for me is like personally significant because like Ming and I are both suckers for chronographs. I think
Okay.
it's the most featured complication of special projects. The Iris last year and Phoenix this year, we'd never really done what I'd consider an excessively priced chronograph, right? Like everything we've done so far is like 30,000 francs plus. But when we started Ming, I was still like, I was in my last semester at university. I was, I lived in Des Moines, Iowa. I worked on campus for 725 an hour before taxes. So I remember like buying $1,000 watch was like, how much ramen do I have to eat? And
It's a
like,
huge deal.
yeah,
Yeah.
what can I do? And so I think for me, it was always important that, and because chronograph's my favorite thing, it's always important that we had something where I have friends now who are like, they've gotten into watches and they're like working their way up through the watch world. And they're like, hey, I'm ready to sort of put down, five to $10,000 into something really nice. What can you suggest? I think the Phoenix is something now. I've been wearing this prototype for like, honestly, since it got to me, I haven't taken it off. I really love this. Like, this is the watch I'd be like, this is what you should get. Right? It's interesting. It's a chronograph. It's a destro. It's got enough subtlety that you can wear it every day to the office, regardless of where you work, what you do. But it's got enough overall fun little details and things going on that either if you know, and even if you don't know, you can enjoy it for yourself. Or if you're introducing somebody else to watches, there's a lot to talk about. And it's a chronograph. Like you can fidget with it all day long.
Yes. You can, for me, I would use that to like time dog walks.
Right. There
That
you
would be
go.
my absolute use case. And I know that about myself.
So exactly.
Yeah, I mean the Phoenix is awesome. I would love to get my hands on one day for sure. I had a couple of questions on that actually. Well, one a comment, then a question. The lugs are so cool. I feel like the way that there's almost like the three micro. No, I'll post some pictures of it, but those three like stair step in them is just super unique. I really like that. And then on the dial itself, there's kind of a sandwich situation. What's underneath that top layer that kind of gives it that color? And is it a color gradient? Is it just one monochromatic color? Talk me through that piece because I feel like it gives it this extra life depending on how you might wear or see the watch with light.
So it's a two-part dial. You have a metal dial on top that has the circular brushing and just like think of it almost like a window, and that has like little cutouts in which you'll see like the radial streaks that go towards the bottom sub dial. And underneath that, there's actually a base metal dial that has what we call a multiphasic coating that's applied to that. And so depending on how light hits it, the angle of incidence, it actually shows up different colors. So about a year ago for our 8th anniversary, we released the Iris, which had a much more extreme shift of color because of the sort of layout of that dial. And so you would go from like greens into blues into purples into pinks, and that was like really intense and really cool. This sort of like the Phoenix gives you something a little bit more subtle. So you get more of a blue to purple shift depending on the angle of incidence, which was really fun to do video of because you could see it as like I was using a slider, and you could see it go through the shift as like it goes from like a blue into purple.
Okay. And what is that term again that describes like the shift?
It's a multiphasic coating that is applied to
Multiphasic coating. You
Yeah.
have taught me a new word today, Jason. Multiphasic coating.
Every time I read
Awesome.
our press
See.
releases, it's education for myself.
Well, I've got like two more questions for y'all, and then
Yeah.
we'll wrap this thing up with a beautiful Ming designed bow. My question is, I like to ask this for anyone who's kind of like in the world of watches that comes on the show. I'm curious, like for both of you, if there's another watch brand that you just admire from afar on like kind of how they run the show.
Ooh.
Do you
I
want
mean,
individual answers for it?
yeah, of course. I mean, go for it, Jason. Sounds like you have one already.
Well, I actually really like our friend Josh Shapiro, who's based out of California, actually. Sort of what he's been doing with the whole like American-made watches and the way that he approaches how he has his team. And I think it's very different to what we do. I mean, he makes the Resurgence series, and I'm pretty sure like every single one of them is different. But I think there's the same vision of pushing things to the nth degree and sort of making the business work around that. And so Josh and his team, I think, the first time I met him was in Singapore, and he's just a pretty cool guy. And he's like, we didn't end up talking about watches that much. I asked him about his background as like a history teacher, and we just like nerded out for an hour. And he's just like a really cool dude. And to know that someone is working in the space and like just really trying to make that dream happen, I really look up to him for that.
Shout out Josh Shapiro.
I think I struggled to come up with just one because I think there's several brands I look at, and there are aspects to what they've done with their brand that I really admire. Josh, I think Jason had a great point about Josh. That's definitely one. MBNF is to me like Max lives in Dubai as well. We see each other a few times a year, and I always tell him what he's done to sort of build community that they call it, the MBNF tribe and community, and galvanize just sort of people behind his vision of watchmaking. To me, is always something that stands out. The other thing that stands out, and I've told Max this, is there's plenty of videos of Max out there talking about how MBNF nearly went bankrupt a couple of times. And I remember watching this just as an enthusiast before we started Ming. And I was like, yeah, of course he's going to say that. This is like great marketing spiel. And every time I see Max, I'm like, Max, you really fucking downplayed this. If I knew how serious you were about how hard this business is, right? Like we might have thought twice about like getting into this. So I think the community aspect and given the kind of watchmaking he was doing when he was doing it in a way that I admire, and I think that ability to communicate is something we can all aspire to.
That's awesome.
It's one of the things I think even at Ming we struggle with is we have all these ideas, but getting that across to our community is always something I think we can continue to do a better job at. Another one is honestly Rolex. Right? There are a lot of things about Rolex. Yes, it's they've had centuries or decades to build what they've built, and yes, their ownership structure creates incentives that allows for it. But regardless, they still manage to pull it off. And one of the things that to me is, I'll probably get a lot of flack for this, but I think the Rolex is the equivalent of a Toyota Camry. It is the best.
You're gonna get a lot of shit for that.
But no, but in the sense that like I'm a big car guy, right? So I'll buy like a bunch of weird stuff Like I'll change my car every 6 months. I'll buy weird stuff that I know is going to break down. I'll just accept it. And that's what independent watchmaking is. But like, if a friend calls me and they're like, hey, you're a car guy. What do I get? They'll just get me from A to B. That will be really comfortable, right? That will be economical, that I don't have to maintain, that my family will like, that everybody will appreciate, that I won't get judged for, and won't cost me like a boatload of money. I'll be like, buy the highest spec Toyota Camry you can find, because it'll be way more comfortable and have way more features than an entry-level BMW or Mercedes or whatever else, right? It's going to be basically maintenance free. And it's the same thing with watches. Like my dad's friends call me because they're getting to retirement age, and they're like, hey, we want to buy like a watch to commemorate our careers that we want to leave to our children. What Ming should we buy? I'm like, don't buy a Ming. Like, what do we buy? I'm like, go and buy a Rolex. Because, you can't even buy a Patek these days or an AP, for whatever reason. Rolex is harder, but not impossible. And, if you're, and I tell them, like, you're not buying a watch because you like the watch. You're buying a symbol to leave for, like, your kids, grandkids, whatever else.
Right.
That's
It's the Patek.
it's not. No, it's not. I
tagline,
don't
but
think it's Patek. I don't think it's AP. I think it's Rolex. If you're just buying a symbol for the sake of a symbol, Rolex has transcended watches in a way that I'm not going to say nobody ever will, but at the moment, they're the only ones that have.
I actually very much agree with you on that statement, and it's still a damn good watch. I think it's actually very couth right now in watches, certainly in like some of the collector communities that I'm in, to throw punches at Rolex. And you can do it. You can do it if you want, but the facts.
I think there are good
facts
reasons to do it for some things, but in other aspects, you do see a business there where they run it on a different time scale to everyone else, right? It's like, why does Rolex do the things they do? Is nobody really knows, but they're not thinking about the next like 2 quarters of cash.
Totally. Yeah, they're operating in a different dimension with a lot of their stuff, and I just think at the end of the day, they make great watches. And I appreciate them. And there's a reason why people still choose year after year to buy them. Praneeth, Jason, thank you guys so much for coming on Watch the Tech. This was such a pleasure, and we covered so many great topics. So I'm super thankful for this conversation. So thank you again. Really, really happy to have you guys here.
Thank you for having
Thank you,
us.
Seth.
Awesome. Absolutely. All right. With that, I will go ahead and end the episode. Thank you so much for everyone who took the time to listen and watch and tune into the show. So please just keep doing it. That's all I'm going to ask.